Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We yesterday came to a sort of unfortunate realization about how, the game might function graphically. I had been hoping to preserve a certain visual effect that I liked, and it requires quite a bit of work to do so, but we did that work. But unfortunately, I don't really know of a solution to one particular artifact that it has that does seem a little bit like a showstopper to me. And so today I was just going to talk about that a little bit and verify that we can't really work around it or not, or come up with some idea about how we are going to work around it. And yeah, so that's where we're at. I'm just going to briefly demonstrate what the problem is. Today is day 334, so I am doing this demonstration with day 333's code. So if you want to follow along at home, that's the code to be working with. So yeah, if I go ahead and compile the current version of the code base and then I boot it up, you can see when I run here that I've kind of got a little bit of a stair-step pattern that I created here. And much like we said that we wanted to do before, I've made it so that now they're completely orthographic, so they don't do any perspective transforms there, right? But then what happens when I kind of go up, I still have this nice sort of upper floor kind of fade in effect that I really kind of liked, and I thought it was nice. But we then come to this sort of unfortunate situation where what happens now when the player wants to transition up to this, next floor or whatever. And so we just kind of have this bad discontinuity where the player will just kind of pop up there and it doesn't look particularly good, right? So I don't really know what the solution to this problem is. I'm not really sure. There's some obvious issues with it. And I think they're worse than they would be if only the hero could transition between floors. I would like to make it so that other characters who wish to can transition between floors. For example, these little snake things or whatever. If they want to go down the stairs, I want to make sure that they are able to go down the stairs as necessary and so on and so forth. Because as, over time, when we start to build sort of the gameplay part of the game, I want to be able to have characters, NPCs who are sort of smarter, the smarter NPCs, let's say, who can kind of navigate around the world a little more freely, potentially, than just some of the stupid ones. Maybe some of the stupid creatures, they just stay in one particular room and don't really do much else. But some of the smarter NPCs would want to be able to do, that kind of moving around sort of thing. So I guess what I would say here is I don't really know how to solve this problem. We tried a couple things. It seems to me like there's a couple issues. So I'm going to say what the most severe one I think is that if you look at what happens here, it's really hard to even tell where those stairs really even are. Right? Because one of the nice things about when they used to be in actual perspective is that you could sort of tell how they connected neatly to the floor above them. But now, in the circumstance that we see here, you can kind of see that, I don't really even know where that floor is, really, because it's in this, separate coordinate system that doesn't sort of work seamlessly compared to my other one, right? So I really don't even know where I am relative to it. If you look at where it actually is, it's roughly I don't know, on this level, right? It's here. That's where it is, right? You can see if I hop, I'm hopping on this row. And that just doesn't look intuitive at all. So we fundamentally have this problem, I think, where the orthographic nature of how things are displaced in that way just doesn't actually work if you start to have a real perspective transform on above floors. So not great. I don't love it. So that's a big problem. Now, I guess what I don't know is if I were to allow these things to scale, would that help enough, right? Okay. And I don't know that that would help enough either. So there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, that I really don't see a lot of potential here. And so it kind of is frustrating to me because I like this effect, and we did the work to make sure that it would happen, but I just don't see a lot of ways that we can keep movement between floors working if that's the way, if that's the situation. I just don't see it. Now, I mean, one thing that is true is I suppose what we could do is say, well, maybe you can't really transition between floors in that way. One thing I could do is say, all right, so, maybe I don't really care about stairwells anyway. Like, who cares about stairs? I just need ways of getting from one floor to another floor quickly. And maybe that works better. I don't know. It certainly seems like something that could be okay. And in that case, we would have a situation where there'd be sort of more of a thing you jump on and it bounces you up, and then another thing that you could jump down or something like this, right? So it'd kind of be more like a jumping area. And that seems reasonable because then only on that jump would we do sort of the transition between the two levels. We could still keep that sort of animated fade in, fade out, and so, in theory, I could see that being somewhat useful. I'm just not sure. I think maybe that is perhaps the best way to go, because here's the thing. Let me just say something sort of game designy, even though I'm not a game designer and I try to keep the game design talk to a minimum. I guess what I would say is I didn't really like the idea of the stairwells in terms of the gameplay implications that I felt that they had either. And the reason for that is simply that what happens when you're standing on the stairwell? You're kind of standing on this in-between point between two screens, and then it's like, oh, does it become this game about, I want to try and get up on the stairwell and sort of hit people from the stairwell because then it's easier for me to avoid people up here? Or, is the stairwell become some kind of weird, place that, monsters get stuck in or whatever? It's just kind of this weird thing that gameplay-wise, I didn't have any real reason for there to be a stairwell. It's just this thing that's like, well, in the real world we have stairs, so, there's a stairs or something, right? So I would say that I do fancy the idea of saying, okay, maybe there's no stairwells. Instead, we just have a thing that you hop on, and when you hop on it, it teleports you kind of. I mean, and you don't really teleport, we'll draw you animating to it, but you don't control your motion between those two, I just hop on it, and it's like, like a bounce pad. It bounces me up to a higher level, or I can jump on one at the higher level that has a bounce pad down, and it'll just bounce me down, right? So they're kind of like instant shoots sort of thing. And that's much nicer because then the player is never spending any time actually hanging out in between two levels, because the gameplay doesn't really support that. The gameplay doesn't really have any real concept of what that would mean or why you would be doing that or why it's interesting. And so just saying you're either in one room or another in terms of gameplay is actually what I would prefer anyway. And so maybe what I can do is just say there is no connective tissue between two levels vertically. There is only sort of a connector pad that can go in either direction, and maybe the pads are generally unidirectional. So there's a pad that goes up and a pad that goes down. If you can go both directions, then both pads exist. But a lot of times you can only go down or only go up, for example. Because that is another thing that I want, in keeping with the concept of, say, being like Legend of Zelda or Binding of Isaac or these sorts of games, which are kind of, like I said, kind of the direction that we wanted the game to sort of go in roughly in terms of its structural components. For example, Binding of Isaac only allows you to go down, right? You more or less cannot return to a higher floor once you have gone down to a lower floor. And there's a number of reasons why that is a good mechanic to have. And there's certainly plenty of places in Handmade Hero in terms of the design where I wanted that to be true, where you can only go downward, and it's not really a Binding of Isaac kind of thing in that you can never get back up again. But it is the case that generally you're supposed to proceed downwards in certain segments, and it will only be once you kind of get to the bottom that you will ever be able to return back to the top again. So in that way, I think this makes a lot of sense. So I think perhaps the answer to this problem is just to say, all right, there isn't the notion of a stairwell. That's not a thing. There's just the notion of a teleporter and pad, and it's not really a teleporter, I guess, but just a little convection pad or whatever. And that pad does that particular motion, right? That seems pretty good. And then I think everything just works, because the only problem right now is the stairwell. So all we would need to do is when you're on that sort of transition between the two, we would just have whoever is moving along the pad just do sort of whatever it is, whatever that linear interpolation is between the floor Z's, and that would be that. So I'm relatively happy with that. I think that's fine. I think that's totally fine. So maybe we'll try that today. Maybe I'll see if I could implement something like that just to verify that that's okay, because I think that's really it for our Z. I don't think I have anything else I really want to do with Z, because now we've pretty much got everything that we want. We've got the alpha fading. We've got we've got sort of multiple floors stacked on top of each other. So we're pretty much fully Z capable now. Everything is very smooth. So I like everything other than the effect of that stairwell. And so let me see, maybe we'll just try and see what happens if I try putting in some of those pads as we spoke about, and then we'll kind of go from there. So that seems like a pretty good idea to me. And while the entities are hopping around, if they hop on one of those pads, it'll spring them up to the next level, or if they hop on a down pad, it will spring them down to another level, right? And the way that I could do that is just we have that notion of those sort of traversables, right? I could just tag one of those, one of the operations that a traversable could have on it is that it could, basically be a teleport to another traversable, so that when you hop on it, you sort of automatically end up going on this traversable. All right, so let's try that. We don't have a lot of time left because I've been blabbering and whatever you want to call that. And I'm out of tea. And that's no good at all. So who knows how far we'll get, but let's give it a shot. Okay. So first things first, I'm going to pull the concept of the apron stuff out of here because I don't actually want it now. We had this next floor Z piece of information. I'm going to get rid of it. I don't want it. It needs to go away. So there it goes, and now it's gone. I'm going to go back here and take a look at this situation and say that it's going to be gone too. And so I think all we're going to do is just pass that floor Z and be done with it. That's all there is. Okay. So that's nothing, we're still exactly the same. No change there. Basically exactly what it was before. So then I'm going to go and I'm going to take a look at those traversables. And I'm going to take a look at what we have as far as traversables here. So we have these entity traversable point things, and you can see that we've got like a V3P and we've got an entity that's an occupier, right? So on one of these traversable points, if someone lands on it, then now we sort of have this idea that something might happen here, right? And so you can imagine if this was sort of a teleporter or if this was one of those sort of teleporter things, then what we want to do is have a way of this thing to sort of say, hey, there's another traversable that you're kind of go to if you're if you're one of these things, right? And so there's something in here that's going to be like let's say that we've got another traversable reference, and that traversable reference is propel. I'm uncomfortable using the word teleport because I feel like teleport means that I'd like instantaneously move you to something, like there wouldn't be an animation between the two. But in this case, I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about moving you smoothly between the two. So it's not really teleport. It's more like, boost to. It's like I'm going to give you a sort of a boost to it. I'm going to arc you over to it. I don't know exactly what the right word for that is. I guess I'm going to say like auto boost to because I have no other idea what it should be called. So I'm just going to call it that for now. So that auto boost to is going to be the thing that you're going to go to when you land on one of these guys. And so I'm just going to sort of start by making that be something that we set. So inside Handmade world mode, when we add a standard room here, we've got sort of this notion that at the end of it, we sort of had these stairs and that sort of stuff. I'm going to sort of nuke that temporarily. So I'm going to say let's say that we don't have any of that sort of stuff, and what we're going to need is some way of sort of having these like pads make a little bit more sense. We're going to have some way that they could be sort of placed in an intelligent fashion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that when we do add standard room, I'm going to say that there's maybe like the notion of like where the hole is. Is the hole on the left side or is the hole on the right side? So that different rooms can have holes where you can go down a hole and the hole isn't always in the same place, right? So I'm going to have like a left hole, right hole, or something like that. And so then if we sort of come down here, what I could do is say like, okay, we've got hole down to the floor below. And so this thing would just say like, okay, if you wanted a left hole and you're in the left hole area, then there's a hole down to the floor below. Otherwise, if you come through in here, then you sort of have a thing that's like, well, we don't want the stairs nonsense, so we're going to kind of put this, and we're going to move it down here, and say, get rid of all of that, and say, okay, if we're in sort of the place where we would have had this other hole as well, then we're going to go ahead and take, let's go ahead and that a little cleaner. That area that used to have the hole, and use that directly. I don't know we don't care about this anymore, so I feel like I'm just gonna do that as well. And so now when we add a standard room, what we could do is, I believe these things are always kind of stacked on top of each other right now. So let's just say that they stack multiple times. And then what I'm going to do is say, okay, when I add the standard room, I'm going to say if the screen index, mod 2 gets a left hole, and if the screen index, and I guess I could say left hole equals screen index mod 2, and right hole equals not left hole. So basically every other one it'll alternate, like left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. You know what I'm saying? So in theory, well, I guess in theory, what we actually have is some kind of a problem with the fact that I added oh, I accidentally placed someone on something that doesn't exist, it looks like. Well, why did I do that? Let me take a look here. I probably inverted when I did the add standard. We should probably, we gotta hurry up and get to world generation stuff so I can stop slumming it with these weird kind of crazy tools. Yeah, so I had this backwards. So this is if we want the whole, right? That's if we want the whole. So we're doing this. This is what we actually wanted to do. There we go. So let's go ahead and run. And so here is like that whole. And I can't, unfortunately, I'm unable to, oh, does that still work? I think it did. Yeah, it doesn't. I didn't think so. I was going to say, we used to have a thing where we could add heroes by pressing the spacebar, and I was like, I didn't think that still worked, and it doesn't. Anyway, what I was going to say is, yeah, so we've got these holes in it, and so now what I want to do is I want to add those little pads so that they can kind of do the, you know, the hopping back and forth. So what I'm going to do is when I add a standard room, I'm going to take the standard rooms and make sure that I remember the previous standard rooms so I can just connect them, right? Pretty basic. So I'm going to do standard room, you know, prev room or something like this. And actually, I guess I can just do that down here. So now I'll know what the previous room was, and so I should be able to connect these up, right? You can kind of see us going through here and adding things like trees and whatever. And we do those sorts of things by using the indexes, like you can see here. We can use the dot ground part of things to figure out like what the traversable reference is that we're talking about in any particular circumstance here, right? So, if I have a particular traversable reference that I want to be able to modify in that way, I need to be able to say that that thing, whatever it is, I need to be able to tag whatever that thing is by saying that it sort of has this back pointer, right? And I think part of this is kind of a little bit of a problem for us because we don't really have any of the world gen stuff in here. We don't really have a good way of actually connecting these things up. The reason for that is because it's already kind of been packed. It's already been sort of packed down into its permanent storage form, and we don't really have a way of reaching back in there to sort of take it back out, right? So we kind of have the situation where we want to sort of leave, you can, let me explain in a little more detail what I'm talking about here. And maybe this is a circumstance where we have to start building some actual world building tools first before we can really test this out in any particular way, but I suppose I can hack it without too much trouble either way. Anyway, so what happens here, like let's take a look at what happens when we do add standard room, right? So what happens when we do add standard room is we go ahead and we create these entities, right? So for example, we'll create begin grounded entity and it has a traversable like so. But when we call end entity, that entity is now packed and it will be packed into the grid at that location, right? What that means is that we can no longer edit that entity without unpacking it again, right? Because again, we store everything kind of in packed format. And so we're not really able to edit it once we finish packing it down. What that means is once we've added a standard room, we're really not able to change any of the elements of those entities again without opening them back up, which we don't really want to do, right? So kind of what we need here is we more need the ability to create these entities open, do a bunch of operations on them, and then pack them down once we're no longer needing to talk about that room anymore, right? So we kind of need the concept of an editable room. It's basically just the sim region, right? But without any of the sim part of it, and without the apron. It's just like a little room with all the entities stored in it still open. And then we just end them all, right? They go end, 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 end. So that is the problem that I'm talking about, and that's the thing that we would need to be able to do, because otherwise I can't really set that teleport yet. So I feel like that is definitely a situation where, you know, the world gen stuff kind of, again, wants to be up there. But I guess what I could do for now is just say, well, all right, let's just only make forward, like things that go forward. Because, or backward or whatever, right? Like we can do one direction pretty easily without having to actually start having world tools that we would need, right? And so the way that I would do that is I'll just say like, okay, well, and you know what? I could probably even do it by just making the standard room be something that can be kept open a little bit longer. Now that I think about it, because we don't have to really call end entity. I don't really remember exactly how this works, but begin entity. Yeah, so creation buffer index, there's this world mode creation buffer concept, right? And that means you can create up to 4 entities. We could just make that be, you know, a very large number, right? That number could be 512 or something. And then you could create all the entities for a room, leave them open, create all the entities for the next room, link them up, and then close the previous set of entries, right? That would be relatively straightforward to do. And we could do something like that. But again, it seems kind of janky, and really, like I said, the solution there is it's not a very good solution. The better solution is to just sort of have the ability to open up regions, edit them, and then close them as necessary. Right? So it's not particularly compelling, unfortunately, either. But yeah, so I don't know. Yeah. So when we create a new room, in this case, we could just choose to put the hero not on the 0th floor. I believe right now what happens is we put the hero on the 0th floor, but I'm going to take a look here. So we do for camera P. So it's really just the camera that determines this. When we create the world, we just use whatever is closest to the camera. And in this case, the camera P is just using sort of whatever the screen base Z is. So we could just put the hero up at the top, right? Let me see here, screen base Z. We could just put the hero up at the top. Yeah, and abs tile Z, as it comes out of here, would just be one off of where it should be. So we could just use whatever the last, you know, kind of used one of these was. And in fact, I could save that specifically. So I could say that we'll just put you on the final screen, and that would presumably solve the problem. So if we want to do, you know, last screen X, last screen Y. Why are these U32s, by the way? Shouldn't they be S32s? Does anyone know why that is? That's a bit weird. I feel like these should be S32s. So since I can use them as these, I'm going to, because I think those should be S32 since they kind of go in either direction. Anyway, so I'm going to say last screen X, last screen Y, and last screen Z. I'm just going to go ahead and take these and say before we do any of the updates here, we'll just kind of set these. Or actually, I guess we'll just set them right here, right? So we'll just say like, hey, the last one we created, here's what it is. And so then, if we want to, we can make the camera appear at the top, the final one instead. So I'll just say, last screen X, oops. Last screen Y. Last screen Z. And that should be abs tile Z. Yeah, and so now, as you can kind of see, we're starting off like on top, right? And we can't actually get down there, but you can kind of see that there is something down there. And so the goal would just be to make it so that we can kind of like hop on this thing and have that sort of make us jump down to the tile that would be directly below us there, right? Yeah, and that's all I really want to do. Okay, so that'll be fine. So if we do that, and yeah, all I need to do to sort of make those things connect now is just say like, okay, whenever I go up a level, I'll just keep the last room, which is this guy here. I'll just keep the last room, and I'll connect something at the top of, at the room above it, I'll connect one of the traversables to the one below it, right? And so in order to do that, I really just need to set for one of these, when we do the add standard room before it closes, I need to set one of those sort of traversable targets. So in the case where I have a left hole, right, I'm trying to do something that looks like this. I've got, and I guess I should draw this a little bit more conservatively here. So in case where I have a hole on the left, then underneath I won't have a hole underneath it, right? In the case where I have a hole on the right, same thing. Underneath it, I won't have one here. There'll be one here, because they're alternating. So what I want to do is say, when I build this floor, if it's got a hole on the left, then what it needs to have is a teleporter here that goes down to there, right? And if I'm talking about one that has a hole on the right, then I need to build a little teleporter here that comes down there, right? So pretty straightforward. So if I see a left hole, then I need to take whatever this prev room thing is here. I need to take that guy. And take whatever the ground thing is and pass, some particular thing. I guess in this case, what I will do is, where is standard room? I'll just say, okay, there's a traversable reference, and this is the target ref or whatever. That thing, if there's a left hole, or if there's a right hole, will get set differently. If there's a left hole, the target ref should be, yeah, I don't know, like, let's see. The left hole is like -5, -3, so it should probably be like negative, the thing would be at, probably -2, so it would be hopping down to -1, right? I'm sorry, to -3. And this is accessed XY, yes? Yes. And so the Y value 0 or 1, let's say it's 0, right? So, that's what the target ref might be for that. For a right hole, we've got 3, the offset X is 3. So we kind of know that it's definitely hopping down to 3. And then it's between -2 and 2, so let's just say the other one was at the top. Let's say this one's at the top, so we'll say it's -2 as well, right? And so in this case, those are what they are, but of course we have to offset them. And this is kind of annoying, right? But you can kind of see we've got to offset them. This is why we need some actual world building tools here, because this is a mess, right? You can see how this is totally unsustainable. Like, we're not going to want to do this when we're actually trying to create the real game world. It's just, you know, everything here needs to be made into nice utilities that just work. Okay, so in this sense, we can just do those guys. Not really anything particular going on there. What I would like to do is say, in the case where we have the first screen, there's nothing below the first one, so I'm going to say that there's no left hole and no right hole on the bottommost guy. That makes sense? And that'll be that. So now if I go back to my add standard room to make this sort of makeshift crappy test case, we're going to pass the target ref here, and in the case where we know that we have a left hole, I'm going to say that this entity, you know, when you're standing on a particular entity that I create, if you're standing on the particular entity that I need you to be standing on for a left hole or right hole or whatever, then the boost, you know, the auto boost target or whatever is going to be equal to that target ref. So, like, I just need to say, you know, if you're at a left hole and your offset x equals this, and your offset y equals this, or your right hole and your offset x equals whatever it equals, and your offset y equals whatever it equals. You know what I'm saying? Then you're all good, right? So you have left hole xy, right hole xy. These xy's are whatever they were. So in the case of the left hole, then, like I said, it's going to be like 1 off of where it was. It's going to be like -2 is where the teleporter is, and the y is 0. What did I say it was going to be here? Y is -2, and the x is what, 4, I believe? Yeah. So that's where the teleport, or I guess maybe it should be on the other side of it, probably. I guess it probably should be 2, because you're going the other direction, I guess. I don't know. Doesn't really matter, but you get the idea. So, yeah, in either of those cases, then we're going to set the auto boost to target, and I think that creates the linkage, again, only in one direction. Now, at the moment, unfortunately, we don't actually have any way to see that these things are set. So what I'd like to do is just quickly add something fairly simple, just a really basic thing to show that we actually set them at all. So inside the entity stuff, when we're rendering the traversables, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of color there just so I can see what's going on, like that they got set at all, before I bother trying to actually wire them up to anything. Because, you know, like I said, we have no world building tools, so it's a little bit presumptuous and finicky. So I'm going to say that we've got a color value here. We've got a color value based on whether you've got an occupier, right? Like so. And I just want to make this now into something that's a little more complicated to how you set the color. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, well, let's just go back to saying that there's a default color. This is like, let's say, the default color that we're going to render these traversables as. And then I'm going to do an if statement here where say, like, if you have an occupier, then you will set the color to this other color. Right? And furthermore, so here I can also say, well, whatever this entity is, if the auto boost to is valid, I don't know how to test for that because I don't remember anymore at all. Let's see here, traversable reference. There you go. So traversable reference. I don't know how to check to see if one of those is actually doing anything. You know, what I want to do is basically say, like, is this a valid thing. And maybe all I have to do for that is just say whether or not the traversable reference, whether the pointer is non-null or not. That might be sufficient because the pointer would be null in a case where, where it wasn't set to anything. But basically what I want to do is something like that. If it's a valid thing that we've set, I'm going to make it like some kind of hideous pink, just so I can see that it actually is there. Right. So yeah, so I don't, like I said, I don't know, we don't seem to have one of those. I'll take a quick look in here to make sure. So here's a get traversable, right? And that returns a pointer. So, you know, maybe it's just the right thing to do to say, like, get traversable and see if it returns non-null. And so that seems pretty reasonable of a way to do it. So you can see I'm not actually getting anything here, so now I'm a little bit nervous. Like, did those things not get set for some reason? I'm not sure. I have no idea. I don't really know what's going on, right? So that's exactly what I wanted to know. So let's take a look and see whether or not those things are ever being set, or what's going on there. Okay, so yeah, inside Handmade world. Also, I'm a little bit interested to know where our performance goes. I'm assuming that it's all still going to the simple pathfinding. Yeah, get closest traversable. So I just wanted to make sure that that's still what was causing us to be slow, since it's very acceleratable. OpenGL render commands also seems to have quite a bit of work to do, but I guess it's okay. Anyway. That's the unoptimized build. We're still probably 60 frames a second, no problem in the optimized one, so it's not really a big deal anyway. And just like to make sure that nothing pops up there. Okay, so I want to see what this is getting set to, like if it's never getting set to anything, or what's going on there, or am I thinking about this problem wrong? So I just want to, when we actually create the world, I just want to go through and watch to see whether it's ever being set at all, just to give myself a little bit of a bearing on the situation. So first off, let's see if that code ever gets called at all. Okay, and it does, so that's good. It gets, in this case, it's getting set to an index but no entity pointer, which would not be helpful. So in that case, that seems problematic to me, because we should have had two things there. Two of those things should have been set, I would think. Let me take a look at that, just make sure. Oh no, that's okay. So having the index be set to something should be sufficient. So that does seem okay. So that entity auto boost to is there. So that all seems good. So I think, now that I think about it, the only problem is we didn't add any unpack code to it. So that's probably all we really need to do to fix it, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, because when these things get unpacked here, we kind of come through and we do pack traversable reference. So we have to make sure that we actually do those packings, like with occupying and came from. We need to do auto boost to as well, and the same would be true on the other side of things, right? Load traversable reference, for example. Also has to be loaded. So let's take a look at that. That may have been the only problem, but there could be, yeah, so there we go. Oh, looks like I was backwards a little bit there, but okay, so that's set now. And so what I want to do is make it so that I hop on that. That one's not set to the value that I actually wanted, so that's a little bit of a mistake. Let me go ahead and fix that. And we only have about 2 minutes left, So I probably won't try to do the animation stuff yet, although, I don't know, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But yeah, so in here, what I want to do is say, like, okay, my y, I was thinking that the higher y was the negative one, because I always think of y as going down. I can't ever seem to shake it. But it's not, it's going up. So that's actually supposed to be a 2 there. And the same is true of this guy. It was set to the wrong values. They were the low values. So I wanted them to be the high values. So I'm just going to go through and undo that mistake. So yeah, instead of -2, it's 2, and instead of 0, it's 1. And so now they should be at the top of the things. That's just where I mentally pictured them. It doesn't really matter for anything, but that's what I wanted. So I'm going to fix it. All right, so now those should all be set properly. And so tomorrow we should be able to just make it so that when we hop on one, it boosts us down to the next one. And that should be about it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A now, because I don't want to start that yet, since I won't have time to finish it, even though it is relatively simple. In the meantime, I want to take a look at the headroom here. Yes, so basically, like, when we compile in optimized mode, we are basically entirely in the graphics, which is good. That's what we want to see, certainly. So. About my first question, will I be able to view it again? Because I was really interested about your answer. You can use the Twitch archive, which keeps it for about 2 weeks. So you can view it via Twitch, I think, for 2 weeks, and then it disappears. Are you using entity component system architecture or different? Different. We are using a very experimental architecture, which we haven't really determined whether it's good or bad yet, because we haven't really gotten to the point where we actually need to do the part that matters. When we actually get further down the game implementation part of the game rather than the engine part, we'll know. But there's several streams on this, so I would encourage you to go back and watch those if you're interested in the approach that I decided to take for entity systems. It is not an entity component system. Although it's worth mentioning, it's definitely closer to an entity component system than it would be to, say, a C++ inheritance hierarchy-based entity system or something like that. So in terms of like things that are similar to it, it's closer to that than it would be to certain other kinds. Have you come up with a story for the game yet? Yeah, we don't really deal with story and design stuff on the stream, so this is just for programming. I recall when you were writing the head body behavior code, you want to ensure the player always had control over the head. Is this auto-hopping going to interfere with that? No, I don't think so, because he already does auto-hop, right? So the body always goes on a hop, right? So you're only actually able to control the head to a certain extent. Like you can move the head freely, but it has to stay within range of the body, and the body always does hop from one position to another. So this is fully in keeping with that, and it's exactly what I would want to have happen, right? It's that the body, once you commit, the body has to go where it's going to go, and the head has to go with it to a certain extent. It can, lag by however much we allow it to lag. Can the player fall in the hole versus jumping on purpose? I don't believe so. There's no real reason why I would allow that, I don't think, in the game that I can think of. In theory, could these jump pads be on the same level and used like jump pads in Portal 2? So I really don't need them for anything other than just getting up and down between floors. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's any reason why we couldn't experiment with them if we felt like that was important later on, if it looked like there was something cool to do there. But I would say I don't anticipate needing that for any particular reason. But Torgdor, will multi-part entities like the snake be able to go through holes? I think so. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to. Because as long as the snake just always follows the same rule, which is that each segment follows the previous segment, once one of those segments jumps onto the pad, it will jump, the next jump will be down, and then the next segment will jump onto the pad, and they'll all just kind of jump down. So, I assume that will be the way that goes, and the same will be true of like the floating heads. Right now, the heads are allowed to float like directly to their target, which we don't want to do. We haven't actually written that code yet. Like the familiars would not be able to go like directly through the floor normally, but they currently can. But so we would force them to also use the pads probably. What are your thoughts on voxel rendering and/or ray tracing? Do you mean to ask what are my thoughts on voxel rendering and/or voxel ray tracing? Or what are your thoughts on voxel rendering and/or ray tracing unrelated? Like just ray tracing in general. And I guess what I would say is I like some aspects of voxel rendering. There are obviously some attractive elements to it. My problem is just you often want surfaces to be kind of defined cleanly, and it's very hard to do that with voxels a lot of the time. So you kind of end up having to do these sort of hacky things where you create ways of like carving the voxel elements into surface elements and stuff like this. And I just don't feel like, I don't follow the literature on that. I haven't followed the literature on that very closely lately. So they may have gotten further towards making that clean and, not super hacky like it was. But I never really saw back in the, last time I looked at that 5 years ago, let's say, I never really saw anyone who really like presented a clean way that was going to really work for real, right? Which is not to say that it won't. I just hadn't seen the real sort of clear way that works, if that makes sense. So, that's what I'd say about voxel rendering. It's got some really nice advantages. I just don't know how you get, if the surface part of it's going to work out. And maybe the answer is just that, like, hey, eventually we have computers that are so powerful that the resolution of the voxels is so tiny that they're less than a pixel large always, in which case then you don't care about the surface element of it. But, we're not there yet, so it's hard to say, will we get there? When will we get there? If we get there, I don't know. As far as ray tracing, I love ray tracing. Ray tracing is my favorite. The problem is just nobody really knows how to do it efficiently enough yet, right? Even the most advanced ray tracing engines right now just are not capable of running a real game. If you take a look at the Brigade engine, let's say, which I think is the furthest along actual sort of game engine I've seen, it just can't hold a candle to something like, the current Doom renderer or something in terms of the visual quality that it actually produces with animating objects and all these other sorts of things. So, it's got some obvious strengths. It does perfect reflections well, and it does things like, global illumination really cleanly and stuff like that, but it just can't it doesn't seem to be able to get to the point where it's efficient enough to have like big moving scenes with lots of stuff in it and actually produce enough noise-free samples to really work, But, who knows? Again, I think it's like anything else. We really just don't know what the future holds because we don't really know what kind of horsepower we will top out at. So we don't really know what I think the final renderer, quote unquote, will look like. Dr. S80 regarding head body. The player controls the head onto the jump pad, but then the game needs to animate both the head and the body down, right? I thought so far the head was always responsive to player input, not tied to animation. The body just followed. No, so the head right at the moment, the head is kind of not correct. You can move the head where you would not normally be able to move the head. So for example, right now I can do that. That's totally not actually allowed in the game. What would actually happen is the head would stop, like right there, right? And so, it should be more like this, right? So no, the player, basically the head is tied to the body, and the player can move the head around, but when the body is somewhere, the head has to stay within 1/2 displacement. So if you hop on the pad, you will get moved down with the body, and that is the way it is designed to work everywhere. This is the same if you were on a moving platform, same deal. It will move the head along with the body once the body is pulling the head away, kind of thing. Opinion on Vulkan other than it being really hard? I don't really think of it as being really hard. I think of it as being unnecessarily complicated and not particularly mapping well to the problem. I think of it as basically like not a very poorly designed API that attempts to give you access to roughly what the union of current hardware, or rather I should say the intersection of what current hardware is capable of, which I don't like that goal. I think that was a bad design decision given the situation of the graphics industry at the moment. So I guess what I'd say is philosophically, I disagree with Vulkan. I don't like the approach that was taken, and I think it's problematic. But, it is what it is now. So, we'll probably end up having to use it because if that's what hardware vendors decide to support, then you don't really have a choice. This is the real problem with the graphics industry these days is, they don't give you a chip to program, they give you an API to program, and if they do a really bad job designing that API, then you're just stuck with it. So How are holes in teleport paths going to help us find the variable? Well, because in order to find the variable, you must search everywhere in the world, and if the only way you can get up and down is with these paths, then obviously you're going to need to use them. So. Any tips for someone interested in game engines considering getting into the game industry? Not really. Other than what I say on the stream, you know. And also, yes, this year's Handmade Con will have a job fair, which we will be announcing more about soon. Do you have a set streaming schedule? Well, you know, since the stream has ended, it's actually the perfect time to mention that, I suppose, so we'll just go right into that. Let's go ahead and do that. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with a source code so you can play around with it. We have a forum site if you want to ask questions. We have a Patreon page if you want to support our video series. We have a schedule bot if you'd like to know what our schedule is so you can catch the stream live. And we have an episode guide that lets you catch up with old editions of the show. Since we just got asked that question, do we have a set streaming schedule? Yes, you can always find out what the set streaming schedule is by looking at the tweet bot, and you can see here that at the beginning of the week it will give you the entire schedule for that week, and then it will tell you every day what that day's schedule is going to be as well if you're just curious about that. So definitely you can follow that bot or just come to this page and check it out if you need to know. Also, typically on this page, if you refresh this page when there is not a show live, so for example, this episode just technically ended, this little countdown timer will count down to the next time it's live if the schedule has been posted. So that's about it. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I will be back here tomorrow for the last stream of the week. I'm off the end of the week, but then we'll be back here again the following week, so just a brief break. That's about it. So I'll hopefully see you guys tomorrow. Until then, have fun programming, and I will see you on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.